Anyway, I confronted Silvio, who I was directed by Derek Durst to go ask, and he says, Derek told me to trash it.
Trash what?
The Heritage Oak signs, the old one. It's
Another mystery solved. All because of you meddling kids.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the Village Council special meeting January 3rd, 2024 to order. I show the time at 9:05. I show we have a quorum. The only one we're missing at this time is Mr. Councilman Jamie Lyon, and he won't be here, correct?
He will not.
All right.
He said he'll get with me later and I'll update him.
All right. First up, adoption of the agenda. Do we have any changes?
No.
All right.
Make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Items of discussion, preparing for the GO bond. Who's got that?
So I'll take this over if you want me to, Mr. Mayor. Staff has worked over the last couple of weeks to get this presentation prepared. This is what we are intending to present to all the HOA representatives in their group starting tomorrow. We've had extensive review of the presentation that you see here, so we've got a little room for some improvements or changes, but so far everything should lay out pretty clean, pretty good, and we don't expect to be making a whole lot of changes. So if you can advance over to the next slide. And we can just kind of talk through this as we go. If y'all have any questions as it comes up, or if there's any things that come up on any particular slide, feel free to just interject at that point. So we'll start off with just kind of giving a presentation overview of kind of all the things that we're going to talk about during the presentation, which is everything you see there. This is highlighted because we've got to make some formatting changes. So what are the different mechanisms for financing that's available to municipalities? And basically we'll go over the 5 different formatting financing mechanisms, which are general obligation bond, which use the taxing power, revenue bonds, which is for revenue generating assets, special obligation bonds, which are very similar to the revenue bonds. You see those kind of interjectively changed. Project development financing bonds, which is incremental increases. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but it would be something very similar to a project that we have a major development, maybe a water sewer infrastructure development. We incrementally increase those property taxes in the defined area. And then your installment financing, which is basically anything that you would have for assets like Village Hall or buying a truck or purchasing a piece of property. Very similar to what we do on our own individual capacity. Next slide, please. Are there any questions on any, I guess I'll let you guys interject if there's any questions. I'll just keep going if not. Next slide.
Hold on, can I say something real quick? So, that's fine, you keep working on this. Before you keep going, this is what we're gonna start presenting tomorrow night. If you guys don't understand it or don't know it and can't answer a question about it, then stop, ask the question. Because what we're gonna do is after we go through it and everybody kind of has a high level of it, we're gonna go back through it and then like everybody kind of needs to be able to like present it. I don't want anybody not knowing an answer to a pretty basic question. I mean, if it's something super crazy, then understandable, but we ought to know this stuff front ways, back ways, and be able to explain, give the story, and not too much background on why we're doing it, but just enough.
And I'll note, I'll just kind of add to that, there's going to be things that we get asked that we may not be able to answer on the spot. So we will have a sign-up sheet with hopefully the email addresses of all those attendees. If someone asks a question that we just can't answer, we will definitely get back to them and let them know what that answer is.
One question I have, you mentioned the first meeting tomorrow night. Did we get just invites for the meetings that we were assigned to, or were they all on there?
No, you probably just got them for the ones that you're invited to.
Okay.
If everybody wants to pull out their calendar right now, let's put a pin in this real quick, and I'll go over the calendar to make sure that everybody knows where they're supposed to be and when they're supposed to be there. Okay, so tomorrow night is here at Village Hall at 6:30. It's me, Joe, and Jamie, and that's with Meadowlark. We have on the 11th,
And that's at what time?
6:30.
6:30.
Everything is at 6:30 except for one.
Okay.
So 6:30 tomorrow night
For some
here.
reason that was marked at 7 for me, and I didn't put that in, so go ahead.
Is that the one?
Meet with Meadowlark Barn, so. that
Yeah,
may have
that's the right one.
Yeah.
That's, I don't know who put that in there for you. Okay, and I don't know why it's there. Okay. The 11th is Windmore and Providence Estates. We've reached out to someone in Valhalla to see if they can also join. That,
I'm not showing that one, and I'm assigned to that one.
okay, yeah, that's John, Andy, and Wayne.
Sorry, it went to your Yahoo. I'll change that.
Okay.
Okay,
So just to interrupt real quick, Austin, has quorum been announced for that, the 11th?
there is a
Couldn't be a
quorum.
quorum.
3?
3 is fine.
Oh, that's right, okay,
None of these should have quorum.
okay.
Okay, Windmore Providence Estates on the 11th, 6:30 Village Hall. John, Andy, Wayne. The 15th is Robinwood. That is here at Village Hall. That one is at 7 o'clock. That's the only one that's a different time. That is Jamie, Wayne, and John. Robinwood, the 15th, here, 7 p.m., Jamie, Wayne, and John. The 17th is Firethorn, here at 6:30. That is Joe, Kim, and Jamie. The 22nd, here, Village Hall at 6:30, is Belgrove and Providence Ridge. That is Jamie, Bob, and Andy. The 24th is Bridle Path, Wyndham Hall, here at Village Hall at 6:30. That is Kim, Joe, and Jamie.
Wait, which one is that?
The 24th. Bridle Path, Wyndham Hall, 6:30 here at Village Hall. Kim, Joe, Jamie. The 25th is Amber Meadows, Tullamore, Canterfield Creek at 6:30 here. That is Wayne, Jamie, and Kim. The 29th is Marvin Creek Clubhouse, 6:30. That is Jamie, Bob, and Wayne. The 30th at 6:30 here.
Conflict with that, that's ninth graders I have on that date, 29th.
Yeah, but you're not going, it's Jamie, Bob, and Wayne.
Okay, so
That is Jamie, Bob, and Wayne, not Joe.
Well, I'll be here, just so, but I'll be in a different.
Yeah, but the clubhouse, they're doing it at Marvin Creek Clubhouse. They're not even going to be here.
Okay.
I got to get this, I'm sorry.
It's not big enough to have them here. They've got 370 houses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, here's the question I have. For Marvin Creek and the audio visuals for that. Obviously, we've got it perfect here. How are we going to present it out there? Are we gonna move ahead and see what the audio visuals, how we're gonna do it? In other words, we're gonna have the same kind of process to,
That's a really good question, and it's actually not one that we've prepared for. We'll have to ask that capacity, but if not, the staff member that's attending, which is either me or Jill, will have to be prepared with physical handouts.
I would assume their clubhouse has some sort of technical, audio visual for.
Don't assume.
Yeah, I know.
We'll get in touch with Milan and ask him.
Okay.
Christina, would you just check my invites? Because there were a couple of those. They mentioned me where I didn't seem to be.
I was checking them as she was going, but I'll go through and check them again.
Okay, so we're on the 30th, Innisbrook at 6:30, Village Hall, Kim, Jamie, Joe. Okay, now, we have one on,
At Village Hall, okay.
At Village Hall.
This is another one that came up that, it said it's 7 o'clock. Wait, I don't want to do that. It's 7 o'clock it's showing.
no,
I know, but it's in my system somehow it went to 7.
I know, but the other one's not at 7.
I know. It's at 6:30.
Right, but the other invite on there,
It said 7.
it said 6:30, that one. I don't know what you put in. That's the one from Christina.
Okay, but this one I want to delete.
Well, yes, you do.
I know, I'm trying to, and it's not. Okay, there it is. All right, but for whatever reason, they came in at 7.
okay,
Mine did.
okay.
While you were out, Mayor Pro Tem, there was a question asked, there are people on the roof, just in case y'all see. There was a question asked about AV at Marvin Creek. Did y'all happen to have any conversation?
No.
Okay.
Wayne's the only one who's talked to them, so. And you're supposed to call him or text him and remind him about this at the beginning of the year, so you can do that today.
I can also message him too about the AV. Is it Milan?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So we need to add a date and get people signed up for it. It is going to be the 2nd of February. It's a Friday at 6 o'clock. That is Courtyards of Marvin. And that is going to be at their meet and greet, their Friday social. They said that is going to be where you're going to get the most people. So who wants to sign up for that?
Cocktails.
They are definitely going to have cocktails.
I'll do that.
Worrying about Milan instead of listening to you.
Okay.
The 2nd,
The 2nd, Friday the 2nd at
Courtyard.
6 o'clock at Courtyards at their clubhouse. Who wants to do it?
I'll do it.
I'll do it.
Don't make me go through the list and see who hasn't done the most.
I think I'm only assigned to 2.
I won't be here, so I won't be home.
I have my hand up.
Okay, Wayne,
That's February the 2nd.
yep,
Wayne, John,
okay.
And it's going to be at
6 o'clock at the court. Who's the third one?
myself.
Wayne, John, Joe.
Okay. All
At
right.
6.
At 6. At,
And then when will they,
this will not be a formal presentation. This is gonna be you guys having to like
like a meet and greet,
like
walking
shake hands,
around?
walk hands.
Okay, so no, just
Nope.
any questions about the bond, or we'll.
I would take those one pagers with you.
Should we stay in groups, or just go off on our own?
I would.
Yeah, I mean,
I really would.
By that point, y'all should be able to just off the cuff.
Yeah. Yeah,
You've repeated it.
I know, but I always stand to be corrected.
yeah.
You got no problem talking.
Yeah, she won't, but I always stand to be corrected. She won't be there, I'll be fine.
You'll be fine.
And the presentation itself, have we been emailed copies of this?
No. We're going through it today for the first, you guys haven't seen it. This is the first time anybody's seeing it. So I have also just extended an invitation to Weddington Chase, and I've given them 3 dates. Two are existing dates. One is the 23rd, so if they pick the 23rd, I'll let everybody know, and see who can work that. We've also, again, we've extended invitations to a lot of people, we just haven't gotten responses yet. So if you happen to know anybody in Beechwood, Oak Brook, I know, Christina, you said you reached out to somebody in Oak Brook. Providence Glen, you said you reached out to somebody in
Have
Providence.
not yet.
Okay.
I'm still trying to find them.
Providence Glen. The Preserve, we should have, that should not be hard to get them in. Thurl Farms. Willow Creek. Woodland Forest. So if you guys know any people there, then let me know, or reach out to them and invite them, and I can share the calendar with you on what dates are available. And then whoever doesn't know how to utilize the AV system, like I know how to do it, so if you're with me, you don't have to worry about it. But if there are dates where I'm not on the schedule and it's here, then you guys need to pick somebody to figure out how to work the AV system. So on the 11th, John, Andy, or Wayne, you guys are gonna have to figure out how to work the AV system. It's not hard, it's really actually very easy, but somebody's gonna have to figure out how to do that. Unless are we gonna have staff at all of these?
So far, there's been a staff member assigned to all of them except for the MLK date.
Okay, the 15th, okay. So will staff know how to work those?
Yes.
Okay, well then only MLK dates, so whoever's got that one. Sorry, I gotta get that.
I know someone, I believe, at the Preserve, so I don't have their contact info, but I think my wife does, so but we'll let Kim know that, so.
It ought to be interesting to turn out.
Well, again, we're coming to them, but I would not, just in general, expect many. Usually, we do expect many at the ballot box, so it'll be interesting to see how that all turns out, so.
We had a gentleman here this morning that we hadn't been able to get a hold of, and I forgot where the community is, but, he said that he came in without an appointment or anything else, just to, saw where Christine sent this meeting notice out, just to see what was going on and where his community fit into it, so Kim set him up with a meeting and everything, so he's happy. So there are people interested, and they're taking it on themselves if we haven't got a hold of them to get hold of us to set up a meeting.
I know we have coffee with council on here. Who else is with me tomorrow morning?
I think Andy is. I think I know someone from the Preserve. So
Okay.
I made a note.
Okay, good. Because that should be an easy one. Like, we know people in there, and we have the president's information, they just haven't gotten back to us.
I sent Milan his reminder
Okay, good.
and I asked him to confirm.
Okay, so, does everybody have their dates? Is everybody good?
Yep.
Does anybody have any questions? Nope, okay, fantastic. All right, Christina, proceed.
Okay. All right, so the first slide, just go back, just so we can start over, if you don't mind. Go back to the very beginning. Okay, go ahead, advance out. We're going to give them an overview of the presentation. These are all the good things that we're going to talk about tonight. Move on. There's 5 different ways for municipalities to finance different projects, and we'll go over these really high level. I'll try to get some specifics on these, just in case we have some questions on these, but we might have questions that we can't answer on these particular slides here that I'll try to do a little research beforehand. Any questions or comments on that one? Okay, next slide. So what is a bond?
What would be an example, just out of curiosity, of a special
So go back to so the special obligation are unrestricted revenues other than our taxes. So it would be very similar to like a water and sewer project that generates revenue, but you're not necessarily using the revenue to pay for the bond. So I don't have a lot of experience with special obligations. I need to do some more research on that and get a better example. But water and sewer projects, landfill projects, those are some of the ones that would be under that umbrella. Yes. The GO and the installment financing, but you have to have collateral for the installment. So you would think of the installment as anything that you would do in your own normal life, buying a house, buying a truck, that kind of stuff. The revenue bonds are for actual revenues. Yeah, and this, an example of a special obligation is also, like you can use it, like we rent this building out, so we could use a portion, we can use some of the rental fees to pay those bonds back. They're either revenue or special obligation bonds. They're treated very similar in terms of how the LGC looks at them. That's a good question, though. Next slide. What is a bond referendum? It's basically a voting process where voters decide if we should raise taxes to fund certain projects. We will have the Transportation and Park Recreation bond referendums and the March 5th elections, and we'll just very vague leave it at that.
And I just want to make it a point. We need to be very clear with, that's the first thing that comes out. This is not us deciding as a council. This is the community deciding. And look, Annie, so it's imperative to get informed and informed properly. You start seeing stuff out on Nextdoor and stuff like that. That's, in my view, not the way to really dig in and find out what this is. But we need to let the community know this is a venue or a way to get funding for something that we're creating. It's a matter of the residents deciding, not us as a council. That has to be clear with them that it's not us deciding it.
Yeah, and I think once we get a smidge further, we're talking about the survey that was done, and we'll talk about that to be like, this is what the people said that they wanted, this is how we're packaging it. But again, ultimately, it's the voters' decision. So yeah, that's very important.
My past experience of presenting stuff to a community, it's good to tell a story of how we got here, and then ultimately, quickly, how it affects, basically the community in this form of a tax. And then in the middle, you can go back to the middle and say, here's what we're going to accomplish based off of the survey. But I think what's real important is I think a lot of people, especially where I live, a lot of people are totally like, what? What? Like, what's this about? And regardless of how they're feeling that way, it's real important that we go back a little bit to yesteryear of how we got here. And I remember very clearly, we were at a retreat at Firethorn when all this was coming up, and it was like, how did we get here? Why are we even doing this? And it had to start with the roads. And prior administrations that decided, we were going to take over roads. And that's what most people are going to say is, why are we doing this? And I mean, we're piggybacking it with the fact of with some of the other things we've come out, which is great for the community, the amphitheater and such, and what we want to do with the parks and such. That's great that we're packaging this. But I think that's important is that how did we get here? And I hope that's in here, I guess.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. If you can advance to the next slide.
And Bob, I agree with you. I think that telling a story is really important, but I don't want to get bogged down in so much of the, past details. I mean, they're important, but, we need to give them the background. Totally agreed. And we need to tell them what
the needs are versus what the wants are. The needs are the roads and transportation. The wants is the parks and rec.
What the survey was done in
19.
I think once y'all let us go through the presentation, it'll
Okay.
make sense
Yeah,
and you'll understand it.
And then we can go back through it and
Yeah.
talk about how we would present it.
All right, so why is the village seeking to fund projects through general obligation bonds? So in short, we have very excellent financial health, but we do not have cash on hand to pay for all the projects that we want to get accomplished at this current time. The GEO bonds allow for the village to fund the projects while still being able to maintain our high quality of service that our Marvin residents value and to maintain our proper fund balance levels to support our financial health. Additionally, financing these projects over 20 years will allow future residents to contribute to the cost of projects and amenities in which they will benefit. Our current council did decide the 20 years. We could have decided higher, we could have decided lower at this point. We'll kind of go over that 20 years is basically what the tax projections are set at, but it could be lower than 20 years if the project isn't as costly as we anticipate it being. Any questions on that? Next slide.
Yep. I understand you can go up or down, but why don't we just leave 20 years? Because if we can pay it off less, that we can.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we could have gone up 30 years, but we chose not to. We chose to keep it at 20. So at the very max, we have to keep it at 20. Okay. But if it comes in lower than expected, it would be less than 20.
And I think it becomes more palatable too, if over a 20-year period, kind of doing it with it.
20 years too, I mean.
Yeah, we can't go up at this point, but we could have at the time that y'all decided. So that's a good question. Somebody will ask that question. All right, next slide. All right, why not fund these projects through taxes or loans? And this is a really good question that I think a lot of people have. In short, and you can read all of this, pursuing bank-placed installment financing, very similar to what we mentioned before about financing Village Hall, financing a mortgage, financing a truck. You have to have collateral. And for projects like transportation and parks and recreation, they're far less typical for the village to obtain bank financing. They want to see that collateral in their hand. And a lot of those projects in the parks and recreation and transportation involve easements, roadway, that kind of stuff that you don't have collateral for.
Is doing a bond like we're doing it, is it more, how to term this, cost effective? Because I know there's a lot of hoops and you're only focused on one project, but I remember even when we were getting the loan for this building, there were a lot of hoops and approvals, but I don't remember it costing as much. It was just, okay, it's like filing for an application like anyone going to a bank. Hey, here's my credit, here's what I'm doing. Whereas this process is costing the village some money to approach it this way, but the benefits, I think, is what we've decided, outweigh it. So it is more expensive to take this route for funding.
I think I think yes and no, a Hunter answer. I think the answer would be yes if the bond doesn't pass, but if it passes, you're going to have lower interest rates so in the long run it would be cheaper.
Overall cost would be cheaper.
Okay.
And we probably couldn't even get installment financing to do what we want to do.
Right.
Because we don't have the collateral to do it.
You could likely get installment financing for Village Hall Park for portions of it, but not all of it. No, I don't think anyone's going to finance a playground or a fitness court. They may finance the land, but
And technically, the beauty of this is it's not a debt against, in other words, it's not a debt. It's, we need the money as we need the money. It's not like,
they can take it away.
yeah, it's not like we have here on the Village Hall.
So, and again, going back to your question, the last sentence here says, additionally, bank-placed loans will typically carry higher interest rates than a GEO bond. So that kind of sums that question up. Borrowing the money via GEO bonds allows for the village to complete projects more timely. We can get a lot done in a shorter amount of time. We have a certain level of cost certainty, that hopefully will achieve economies of scale and avoid future inflations, as we've seen to be a massive issue over the last, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and just to kind of simplify it to the way like residents might understand it, it's more a line of credit.
The installment financing?
Geo bond.
Oh, yeah,
The
yeah.
GEO
yeah.
bond is more
Yeah.
like a line of credit that you would take out on your home. Yeah,
But we only have so many years
to
to
utilize it.
decide if we need them, so that.
We're doing everything right when it gets approved. All the projects.
All right, next slide.
Me too.
You won't be able to get through Murray, there'll be too much construction.
Yeah.
What other places have successfully done GEO bonds? And I'm not going to go over this whole list. I'll just let folks know, here's a good list of general obligations bonds that were passed in November of this past year, so very recently, and you can see the amounts and what they were for. There's a lot of Parks and Recreation on there, and a lot more than what we're asking for. So a couple of them there, and then next slide.
Where's Wendell?
Wendell's in Wake County, I believe. It's in the Raleigh area.
I guess I'd be more concerned because comparing it as far as population and
Yeah.
one on there is close to our population.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that question without pulling stats, but we're just kind of trying to prove the point here that we're not the only place that does it. Here's
And
a
I know
lot.
anyone in WUMA has not even explored this, anyone in that group, because we've talked about this, and they're like, wow, you guys are on to doing something like this, but it's another way of looking at it. And again, we push it, it's really the community that's gonna decide it, not us forcing it down their throats.
But you all,
Question on this one, I'm looking at other past deals. The graphics on this are great, but do we need to use the word deals?
So this is highlighted because we've got to make some formatting changes, so it is a deal. I mean, it's a public sale of a bond. So it's, we can change that word, but
You know, the past bonds?
we can do that.
so the difference between this slide and the previous slide was what just passed in November.
Right.
Meaning they haven't gone out and actually gotten like their interest rate. These are done, completed deals because they've gone out and
Okay.
pulled money. So that's the difference between these two.
Okay.
Now, what were we talking about before that? You
Could,
said something.
can we describe this as part of a movement, that essentially is putting some of this decisions more back in the public sphere from a referendum standpoint?
Yeah.
Rather than, it seems to be that this is a movement where, individuals like ourselves on councils want to make sure that we're moving in the right direction with the will of the voters.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think at this point in the slide, I think this is where you guys can maybe provide that commentary. Like, as we get to this point, one of y'all that's in the audience can kind of say that.
One thing, when you were talking about WUMA, you were talking about, what's one of you were talking about WUMA? Somebody was talking about WUMA.
I was.
Most of the members of WUMA don't maintain their own roads. Not all, but most don't.
One other is Waxaw, that's it.
So, and has Waxaw never done a bond?
I don't know. Of course, their revenue stream is completely different than everybody else.
Significantly higher. So that's when people are saying, well, what about the communities that are like us? They don't own their roads. They don't take care of their roads. So that's going to be your response to that. And in order to we're in the road business, whether we want to be or not, we're in it. Can't be half pregnant, like Joe likes to say. So that's the need. We've got to be able to take care of all of our residents. So that if somebody says something like that, like, well, Weddington's not doing this. Wesley Chapel's not. They don't maintain their roads. So that's your response to that.
I would say is, we're doing this to,
Yeah.
our previous board, or
Stallings is-
previous council made this obligation. We're trying to fulfill it.
Yeah.
And the only way we can fulfill it is doing the bonds.
Or we would just vote to raise the taxes and
Yeah, but that goes in perpetuity typically. When you
Yeah.
raise the tax, you're not usually taking it back. This has a sunset clause to some extent, because once we get in it, we'll have the money, then again, once you put a shovel to it, you have to put a budget to it. what that's gonna cost is for future
Yeah.
council to decide, okay, do we need to bump up the tax? We're not arbitrarily bumping up the tax, because that would be, I don't even know how much, because, again, it's about fairness too. Is it right that we all pay the same tax, but only 50%, 8+ years after we implemented this road acceptance? Is it fair that we're all paying the same tax, but we're not getting equal treatment from when a road needs to be
DOT
repaired?
roads.
I would venture a guess that if we did this by just raising taxes, that the tax rate would be much higher to be able to fund projects as they come along, and it would take a
Significantly
lot
longer.
longer amount of time, and it would be more expensive in the long run, too, because it would take so much longer to get projects done. So doing this,
This is speed that we can get it done, economies of scale, and we're avoiding the inflation.
right, so, I mean, it makes total sense to do it.
I think the question that, again, I'm basing this off of some questions that have been thrown at me, is why? We pay state taxes to the DOT. Why are we taking over the roads?
Because DOT's broke and they don't have any money, so if they want money, then they're gonna raise your taxes. So regardless of how it happens, your taxes are gonna be raised from one spot or another. And should the state take care of them? Absolutely, but we have seen that they're not going to.
And wouldn't you rather have control at home about how they're taken care of, rather than waiting for a state agency who doesn't care, really?
So a lot of what y'all are saying is already in the slides. So if y'all want to go through them once and then we'll come back around.
Really wants us to shut our mouths and go through this?
I think there was a comment made if you have questions along the way, though.
So, yeah,
Christina,
I think,
Just fix the parentheses on the.
yeah,
secondary ones.
that's why it's highlighted. We know we've got to make some formatting changes here. All right, so next slide.
If you have
So-
questions, make a note on which slide you have a question.
Yeah,
around.
that's probably better, and then we can go back. So how long has council been discussing the GO bonds? So we first started discussing the idea of GO bonds about 6 years ago. However, we didn't really actively pursue the GO bond process until the retreat of 2021. We had a very in-depth conversation during that time, and primarily it was focused on road projects, completing the Newtown Marvin roundabout. But since that time, we've added several things to the GO bond, which, evolves into all of the DOT roads, expanding the Greenway network to provide greater connectivity, and then funding some various park projects. Next slide. So when he pulls it up, it basically says, has there been any public support for projects listed? So in 2019, the village conducted a community survey that was sent to every single household in Marvin. We had a very specific code on these postcards that ensured only one response per household. Of those surveys, 1,800 were mailed out. We got 333 back. According to the statistical experts in the world, a statistically significant sample size is 317 with those margin of error and confidence levels. So basically what that results in is that our survey results were statistically significant, and they're a very good indicator of what the public desires in Marvin. Next slide. So I just wanted to go over a couple of the questions on here so that you all can see how what we're doing now is indicated of what the community wanted in the survey. The question here was, would you like to see more park space, open space, and recreational opportunities in Marvin? And the majority of folks in that survey said yes, a very overwhelming majority. Next slide. The question here was, of the greater land, if the greater percentage of land and development is reserved for conservation, what kind of uses would you like to see? And majority of those, again, wanted to see greenways, nature preserves, and parks. Next slide. The most important greenway connection for responses is neighborhood connectivity, and then we had some outside trails and park connectivity. Next slide. So of that, this slide right here kind of summarizes exactly what we just said. 77% of people want more open space, more parks, more recreational space. Of that 78% of the greenways, 63 presented nature, or favored nature preserves, and then 54 favored the parks. Next slide. So in
How are
totality,
we defining outside trails?
I don't know how that was defined in the slide, I mean, in the question. Go back to the question.
Outside trails are Carolina Thread Trail, Mecklenburg County Greenways, et cetera.
Does it say that in the question? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, there you go. Good find. All right, so this kind of totals up that the bond totals that we are putting on the referendum for March 5th. There's a $15 million transportation bond, which includes the DOT roads, connector roads, and a lot of our greenways for that greater connectivity. And then we have a $5 million Parks and Recreation Park grant that's on the ballot. Next slide. So we'll just kind of go over, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this one because you can read it, but basically we'll go over this and tell them what specific projects for transportation and what the costs are. There's the greenways, about $10 million, pedestrian improvements, sidewalk repairs, and we'll go over all of those. Next slide. This goes over the greenways in a little more detail, so it kind of highlights what specific greenways are there and their cost. And I am going to make a note in this slide that we have these numbers based off of a 2020 master plan that did include inflation. And when I say include inflation, I mean they didn't anticipate us getting this done via bond. So it's like a 10 to 20 year inflation rate. So we're seeing very inflated numbers here. And just to prove an example, we pulled some numbers yesterday to show that one of the projects in the master plan was estimated at $433,000, which was the Tullamore. We were able to get that done under $50,000. So that kind of shows a level of inflation. And, now is a good time to just reiterate that, again, if the numbers come in at an inflated cost, or not at an inflated cost, that we get it cheaper than what we have anticipated, the intent is that we don't use that. We only pay for what we need. Next slide. One of the projects that's in the transportation is a private road assessment program. And this basically is a funding mechanism where private road owners can petition to the village to make improvements that they desire. Paving, repaving, curb and gutter. The intent for this project is that the owner of those roads will have to pay back that cost over a period of time not to exceed 5 years. And while council hasn't approved the policy to go here, there's statutory guidelines that allow us to create a process for this. There is a petition that's required from all these private road owners, and it has to be greater than 50% of the linear footage owner of the road. And again, the defined payback can't exceed 5 years. Next slide. So what this question is asking, what does taking over connector roads do for us? Like, why would we want to take over those connector roads? Well, first of all, an example of a connector road is Marvin Road, Joe Carr, Waxhaw Marvin, Newtown. All of these roads kind of connect Marvin and various parts of Marvin and other various places in Union County. They're not just residential roads. So we would have greater local control. We would have the ability to control and reduce speed limits, to restrict truck routes, to provide traffic calming measures, speed humps. We could put in stop signs, stop lights where needed if the engineering analysis dictates that. We would have greater economies of scale and pricing because we would try to get more done within a larger scope, and then we would have standardized quality. Currently, about 50% of Marvin residents are on DOT roads, and about 50% are in Marvin roads. So we kind of have this quasi approach to dealing with road issues. For example, if it snows tomorrow, we apply brine to a portion of village roads, but we don't to DOT roads. So we kind of have these people that are, as you mentioned, pay taxes but don't get the benefit of roads that live in Marvin. So we're trying to standardize that quality of service. We have a higher standard of road maintenance and acceptance in Marvin than DOT does. So we want to make sure all residents are treated equally in that sense.
I think that touching on that fact that we are allowed with the connector roads to maintain them in inclement weather, which we're not at this point, and DOT will not. So and I think a lot of people are not aware of the fact that Waxhaw Marvin is not on DOT's inclement weather list.
We'll add something in there
I think
on that.
that's a big thing
Okay.
for people.
Yeah, one other thing too, we're speaking about connector roads here, and in essence, we've already had to force ourselves to be involved in those with the roundabouts.
Yeah,
So-
we need to put on there that
So would
this
it be-
bond is gonna help pay for that roundabout at
Yeah, so would it
Waxhaw
be,
Marvin and Bonds Grove.
would it be accurate to also state that had we not kind of gotten ourselves involved in the state DOT funding of those, we may still be dealing with the issues times 10 that we were dealing with before the roundabouts, waiting on them, you know? But would that be accurate, that those roundabouts likely wouldn't have happened even by now?
They absolutely, if we would not have ponied up money, no, they would not. be
Because that's more evidence of how and why we've had to get involved necessarily.
That's a very
So,
good point.
go back a slide. Slide. More, one more, yeah, right here. It's listed here, the Waxhaw Marvin roundabout, Waxhaw Marvin Bonds Grove roundabout is listed here, but if you. Okay.
I think that's a big deal, because it's not just repairing and repaving, it's actually building a roundabout, and I think that's a big deal.
The question that relates to more, you were talking, we haven't set a policy yet, but as we go through with this connectors, the plan to have a policy before we embark on the connector roads. And one of the things that I'm thinking about is years ago on Marvin Road, there was a dip that DOT came in and repaired and took the whole road and raised it up so you could see it as you were coming out of. Are we going to address all of these connector roads, and how? Is that part of a policy before we do that, or we just are going to blindly go in and say, yeah, these are the connecting roads we're targeting, but there's no policy that we want? Because usually before we take over a road, we're going to want to make sure we're not getting a lemon from DOT, if that makes any sense.
So we, hang on, I'm writing this down. So we would have to create a policy for maintenance of roads, and we haven't even touched that yet. Because
There's no point in creating it until we know if we get it or not.
we would have a liability exposure if we had a certain dip, so to say, where someone were to run off the road. So we would have to have some type of policy in place to address that. We did include, I don't have it here in front of you, but we did include, I thought it was itemized out here, that we had something itemized out in the project scope of the table that we've been, the model, that included ditch repair. If you remember that, I think we put maybe $100,000 or something in there. That was to address some of the sloping issues that we might see where there's drainage problems. Now, I think what you're referring to maybe is some just backfill, what DOT recently did about 2 months ago, where they went in and backfilled stuff.
No.
Oh, it was an actual
This
ditch.
is a major
Okay.
project where they came in and really not closed the road.
Reslope the ditch, basically?
Yes.
Okay.
Basically raised the road.
They actually raised the road because there was too much of a dip.
Oh, okay.
Low-profile cars would disappear as you were pulling out of fire. It became a big issue because any low-profile car just disappeared. That's how low it was. So they raised it, yet it still is an issue for low-profile cars.
Yeah, we didn't include anything like that in the model, but we did include kind of I think it was maybe $100,000 to address the sloping issues.
Because there's definitely some water issues on some of these connector roads that we need to address.
And one thing, and this is not for right now, but maybe discuss, is there a
Definitely
potential?
not for right now. Write it down on a piece of paper.
Well, no, I just, we're talking about it, is this a potential shared cost with DOT if we're gonna take over connector roads? Have we even discussed that, or you're all or none?
They're not gonna give us anything. They don't have anything to give us. We've already asked them if they would pave it and we could pay them back over time, and they said no.
Miscellaneous drainage, we included $50,000 in. So
Again,
we have a little bit to play with.
we'll come back to that, because I have more to say on that.
Okay, that summarizes everything that I'm going to talk about with roads. Now, I'll get to tax impact stuff in just a little bit, but before we move away from roads, do y'all have any questions, comments, or anything like that? One of the things I will mention, just as we're talking through this, in case someone brings this up and I'm not in attendance, so one of the questions may be, go back one slide. You see at the very bottom, well, I know we'll probably get some questions on the last two bullet points, which are wayfinding at 700,000 and then private roads at 620. Wayfinding, again, is very similar to, people are going to say, well, why are you spending $700,000 on these wayfinding signs? This, again, was a master plan that was done. It includes some level of inflation. It also includes a lot of signs that we may not end up doing. So we're taking these numbers directly from what the master plan says. If we don't use it, if we don't need it, if we deem to tone that down, we won't grab that money is the intent. So
But it's also that this is the cost if you did one sign at a time. If you do multiple signs at a time, you're gonna get it cheaper.
Right.
Like they're gonna have the template to do it. So again, these prices, and it's the same with the greenways, people are gonna see this $9 million and they're gonna be like, holy crap, what is $9 million worth of? This is if you did one at a time, so you're not getting a bulk discount, the economies of scale, and it's taking into consideration the inflation, and especially for the greenways, what needs to really be addressed is, this isn't just putting down the greenways, this is getting the easements, doing the engineering, building it. So, I mean, there's a lot more that goes into it than just putting down the sidewalk.
Well, what people have to understand is we have one shot at this, so we can't go back and ask for more. We can either do it, I mean, it's gonna go, we can always go less, and it's gonna end up being less, but we don't, but
100%.
for planning purposes, the only way we can do this is to do it inflated and then borrow less, because we can't ask for more. And if we mess up on our numbers and we come in short, then we can't finish the project. So
Which goes back to the tax numbers you're going to go over shortly here, Christina, are based on the maximum
The
that
max
we use,
number.
which
Right.
we may not
Yeah.
use. So
Correct.
it's very likely to be less than that.
And
One
one question I've been getting, though, and I think we should be inconsistent in our answer, is why there's such a subsection of what's considered greenways, which is normally associated with parks and greenways, under the roads part.
Because we're trying to give people other opportunities to get around the village than getting in their car.
Okay.
So they're.
It's
so
Okay,
walk-
so,
walk
so
village.
those are specific projects more considered part of the transportation plan than just a greenway through the woods.
Right.
Correct, yeah.
and I think
okay.
we're calling that multimodal transportation.
Okay.
Riding your bike,
People
your
have been
scooter.
asking me, and I said, well, some of them are longer-term projects, and, I didn't know the specific
I
answer
don't
for
think
that.
any of the ones that we're doing are an in the woods, kind of, like in a neighborhood.
They're all
I
connectivity
think they're
trails.
all like connectors so that people can traverse the village without having to get in their car.
And we had a lot of conversation about how do you classify this with the people put this together.
And we picked these trails specifically for connectivity. When we looked at these trails,
Throughout the-
we
throughout
stewed
the
over.
And I know we
entire-
did that, some of the board, but I'm asking just because I wasn't always a part of your
Keep in mind the
deliberations.
Heritage District and what we already have over at Publix, and as far as a commercial, if you will. One other question, it may be a silly question, but I do want to ask it. I'll go out there on a limb. Is NCDOT on board with turning all the roads over to us that we are targeting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if
Another good question, Joe.
If you remember, I'm not sure if you're asking that question for yourself or if that's a question that the community may have, but if you remember, we dubbed kind of the two sections of roads in Phase 1 and then Phase 2. Phase 1 was kind of like the easy roads, the residential roads, the Marvin Creeks, the Ennis Brooks, the roads that DOT don't really want.
Neighborhood roads.
We call those phase one, because those were the easy release of, sure, we'll give them to you. We still had to go around the bushes to get them to release that. And that release is all contingent upon this passing. So those roads, yes. What I'm considering phase two roads are what we're gonna talk about at our next work session, which is your Bonds Grove, your Waxhaw Marvin, your Newtown, your connector roads that have problems. And when I say problems, I mean, you've got stop and starting points in Marvin, not in Marvin. You got half of it in Marvin, half of it not in Marvin. You've got massive projects like the Bonds Grove, Waxhaw Marvin, that still have yet to be completed. So those are kind of what I'm dubbing as the problem roads that are in phase two that aren't as easy as a release as just your neighborhood roads.
But DOT has told us that they will release them as long as we get a release from whatever neighborhood or homeowner abuts those roads. And there is about mid-20s going down Waxhaw Marvin Road. So it's definitely going to take some work to do it, but again, if we put our mind to it, I think we can get it taken care of.
So the answer is yes and no.
No.
I have a specific question, again, in the same conversation we're having here. One of the presentations we're going to be giving to is Belgrove, and they've had issues with their road. So, again, I'm asking as we address the community. When we bring this up to them, probably a question is going to be is, are we part of, are we part of Marvin right now? Is our road part of Marvin?
Yes.
We accepted it already.
Okay, just asking. And then with some of the issues they've had,
They shouldn't have any right now.
They've been all corrected. So,
Okay.
and they are Marvin roads already in our system.
Yeah.
So the bond doesn't affect their neighborhood roads, because they're already part of
I
Marvin.
mean, right, correct.
So, and also to piggyback on that too, is I don't think our intent is to focus primarily on aesthetic issues. I mean, it's really functionality and quality and that kind of stuff. So if there's an aesthetic issue, that's gonna be really low on the priority list. It may get done, it may not. Our main intent is to fix the integrity of the road so that we've got a good, clean product to move forward in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
So the other question I had with that is, with ownership comes liability and responsibility. Have we considered how it might affect our current insurance policies that we have in place right now? Or I don't know how a DOT sometimes may be sued for something for a lack of that, but are we?
I will say that our roads have not caused our insurance to increase yet. I don't think that, I mean, you're right that it does pose more of a liability concern, but in order for us to have a liability concern, we have to be negligent in our approach. So as long as we're not negligent, then,
And we're fixing things
Yeah.
as they come up and we're maintaining.
but we can ask that question.
Look, I mean, the goal is to
Ask the question.
improve, the goal is to improve things, but we still, at the end of
Yeah.
the day, we now own something,
Ask the question.
and it's at least worth asking.
I have
if
a
it
feeling
hasn't.
that if we're lowering the speed limits on some roads and preventing trucks on some roads, that we will be improving our liability
And creating
optionality.
crosswalks and all
Yeah.
that kind of
Right.
stuff, but.
Making safer roads, less liability, yes.
Okay, well, we're going to move away from roads unless y'all have any other questions on roads. One thing I wanted to mention real quick is on that last bullet point where it says private road assessment, 620. Advance over about 2 slides. So if you see, you can barely see it, but at the very bottom of your screen, you see the total of 757.
Yeah.
You see that? Someone may ask why we're only putting 620 when the total obviously here is 760. Since this was done, I actually took out Meadowlark and Lark Ridge and then Bell Grove.
Can we remove those then in our presentation?
Well, Meadowlark and Lark Ridge have not officially been done yet. Actually, Austin, remember I told you to move the Lark Ridge? I still see them both there.
previously, some of the roads that were on this list, including Providence Estates, were brought up to standards in conjunction with DOT, kind of shared costs. Is there any thought that any of these would be eligible to do things like that? Or are we just assuming that those numbers are all coming out of Village of Marvin?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will answer that question from my personal opinion, which is I don't think DOT is going to be accepting any of these old roads that they're going to have to turn around and repave, to have to turn around and release. But I will ask them that question.
Yeah, we need to clean this up because Larkridge is on here twice.
Yeah, I've got a note to take that off.
And it's 2 different prices, too.
Yeah.
One of them should say 0. No, there are 2. Yeah, we'll clean that up.
Yeah, this whole.
That one was supposed to come out before it was put in here, so we'll clean that up.
Okay.
Any questions on roads, though? All right, let's advance over. Advance. All right, so moving on to the $5 million Parks and Recreation project list, we have the Village Hall Park, which is basically on this vacant property that's sitting beside Village Hall, with a amphitheater band shell, which we have a picture of here in a short minute, a multi-use event lawn, a trailhead connector, a walking loop, covered seating. We've also included some funding for additional future opportunities for Parks and Recreation, and then the pickleball and tennis courts were added here recently. Next slide. So the Village Hall Park is estimated around $4 million. That includes all those items that are bulleted there. And then we've earmarked about $1 million for future opportunity growth for future Parks and Recreation properties. Next slide. Here's just an image of kind of what we think that the Village Hall Park is going to look like. We did receive some Part F funding to fund a portion of this project, so you'll see some of this actually being started in the next year, but not all of it. We don't have enough funding for all of it. All right, next slide. Here's a visual of one of the inspirational pieces for the amphitheater. Not saying it's going to look just like that, but that's one of the visuals that we had put into our master plan. Next slide. Well, any questions on Parks and Recreation before we move on to taxes? Okay. So when we're going to this slide, we're really just going to kind of highlight, hey, here's a snapshot of all of the municipalities in Union County and what their tax rates are. Marvin's current tax rate is 6 cents on the 100 valuation, so we're close to one of the lowest in Union County. Next slide. So here's kind of a tax impact analysis on the bonds that we are proposing. Our current tax rate is 6 cents. The additional taxes, if these bonds are approved, if it's just the transportation, now remember there's going to be 2 questions. One of them is for transportation, and then one of them is for Parks and Recreation. So if the transportation only passes, you'll see a 4 cent increase in fiscal year 25, and then you'll see an additional 275 increase in fiscal year 29. If only
So that would put us at 16 cents. Could you just go back to that previous one and then we kind of look at where we fall back in then?
next slide, or yeah.
So it really wouldn't even change our position. It would just be more within the position we're at now.
It's still significantly lower, and anybody that is cheaper than we are do not maintain their roads.
Right.
Okay, advance over. So if Parks and Recreation only, you'll see a 325 increase in fiscal year 26. Now, if both of them pass, you'll see that additional 8 in fiscal year 25, and then the additional 275 in 28.
Christina, somewhere on here, we need to say that, yes, it's if both bonds pass, and we pull the full amount of each bond.
Okay.
Like, that has got to be, and again, this is where we need to be reiterating that, but have it on the slide somewhere.
Okay.
That's if the full 20.35 million is actually utilized, which again, I just don't think it's going to.
We can do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So next slide. So how will that affect individual households? If your household is valued at 500,000 in '25, you'll see an additional $33 per month, or $400 annually. In year '28, you'll see an additional $11-12 a month, or $140 a year. If your house is valued at $1 million, you'll see in year '25 $66 a month, or $800 annually. In year '28, that additional increase will go up to about $23 a month, or another $275 annually. Any questions on that, how we've got it illustrated?
Not how you have it illustrated, but again, something to take note of, that this is assuming the interest rate of 5.344%. Right now, the interest rates are lower than that right now, like by a lot. So again, we need to point that out, that this is the number that we have to go on.
And the reason why is because the state changed their
Correct.
rules.
So we need to make sure that we all understand that, and we're able to talk about it. I think it's in the next slide.
We'll highlight that portion of this
But
slide too.
But highlight that, because again, the current interest rate right now is in the 4%, so it's significantly lower. Yeah.
Is there any concern that this will, the fact that we're breaking it down monthly, could potentially confuse somebody who's going to think that they will have an option of paying this annually, or it could be a monthly bill for them? Like, I get what we're doing, but since it's gonna be an annual on their tax bill, I wonder if this will confuse people.
Yeah, so I would put it as an annual cost, and then say, if you break it down per month, it would be, this would be what you would be paying, but an
I
annual.
agree to some effect.
Yeah.
I mean, do we need to put in monthly? People can figure it out, divide by 12, $800 more.
Yeah, I don't think that, look at our taxes now. We don't think of them as monthly, what do we pay monthly?
And we're talking about a couple $100 a year. We're not talking about.
Do y'all want to take the monthlies out?
Yeah.
I
Guess,
think so.
Yeah, I don't think it's,
I don't, I think people know how they pay their tax bill, but if everybody wants to take it out, then that's fine. But I mean,
They don't know if it's.
A lot of people pay it monthly with it because it's in escrow too.
Right.
Market value.
right, which
Yeah, that's true.
that
It
is
is-
just
it is
wild
in
that
their
people don't
escrow, so
understand
it
where
is
their tax
monthly
rate comes
payments
from.
to them.
Okay, so currently, the interest rate for a 20-year is 4.277. That's a full % less. So, that's a big difference.
So do we want to take the monthly out, though?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. We'll highlight that portion.
I
mean,
would
unless
be
you-
prepared to do the quick math for them
Unless
and
you
say
put it in there,
$800 more.
for your escrow purposes, it's this much more per month added to your whatever, I don't know. It's just, because a lot of people do pay it on their escrow. I do, it's in my mortgage.
Take it out, it's fine.
Okay. Next slide, please.
Definitely highlight the interest rate, then it could be significantly lower.
So basically, this was a question that we got asked that we thought might be relevant, is what is the value of my house? Do I pay it on my house value or on the tax value? So the market value of your house is maybe what you would sell your house at, or what a real estate agent would deem as your property value. But your tax is only on your assessed tax value, which is what the assessor says is your value of your house.
That's changed up to every 8 years. That can be changed, but sometimes they do it more frequently from a real estate standpoint.
State law says 8 years maximum.
Depends on how it works for them.
And our last one was, 2 years ago?
2020, was it not?
And it went down.
No, it went up.
I would,
It went up because they delayed it because of COVID.
I would be hesitant to say the eight years, because it could be 4 years. Like, we're getting ready to do another,
We don't even need to be talking about that. If people have questions about when Union County is going to reassess, they can call Union County. we don't need to be putting our nose in that.
All right, next slide. What is the anticipated debt payment and how will the debt be repaid? So again, as we previously mentioned in one of the earlier slides, our council did elect to spread this out over 20 years. We could have spread it out shorter or longer, but we selected 20 years, so that can't change at this point in time. We chose that because we wanted to make sure that our current taxpayers and our future taxpayers are kind of footing the bill. So if all the bonds are issued at once, the annual debt service is estimated around 1.5 million. So the property taxes that we had just mentioned going up, they will support that debt service. Next slide.
Hold on, can I say something real quick here?
Yes.
This may be a good place to mention that as we have new neighborhoods and new houses coming into Marvin, we did our current calculations on the current, like what our residents are, like their property tax value is today, currently. So as we have more homes coming into Marvin, new neighborhoods being built, or even people annexing in, that would then affect that, the repayment schedule of the debt. The more money we have, the quicker we can get it paid off. So that's just a good place to mention
Okay,
that.
we can do that.
Quick question, just in case I've asked. Do we pay this back annually, or is it quarterly, like our payment on what we borrow? Christina?
Say that again?
It's gotta be annually.
Like, when I.
Or maybe it's not, maybe
I
it's
have to make a
monthly.
payment on this debt, am I doing that once a year annually?
Yeah, I'm sure it's once a year.
Like, late in the fiscal year, or?
I have no clue.
Probably
Yeah.
gotta be, it's probably gotta be after we get our taxes. Right, I mean, I would assume so.
We can't draw from a fund that doesn't exist.
But Christina, why don't you ask Chazzo that question, because that's a good one for Jill to, well, really for all of us to know.
To prepare
I'm
for.
sure it all depends on when the bonds are issued, just like when you're, buying a house. If you buy it on the end of the month, your payment's going to be due. But,
So can we?
but I
if-
can ask.
If this,
Prorated first year, but after that, talking about 20 years, it's.
yeah, that's a really good question, because if we, typically, if we just raise taxes, we would do it starting July 1. What, if this passes, can we just raise taxes in the middle of a fiscal year, or?
No, you have to do it at the beginning. You have to set your tax rate at the beginning of the fiscal year.
So if we know that this passes, then how do we know what to set the rate at?
So if you
So
look at,
would we set it
Yeah.
July 1, 24, or would we set it July 1, 25?
Yeah,
after
if
we know
you-
what the rate is?
if you, we've already actually figured this out. If you go back a couple of slides, just keep going back until I tell you to stop. Right there, sorry, go back. So if you see here where it tells you,
Got it. Okay, so that's a okay, so fiscal year, so July 1, 25 is when we would increase it.
yes.
Okay.
So, and again, it goes back to when you start making payments on, are they quarterly? But in the kitty, in the account, once those taxes are assessed and people pay those, there's gonna be a significant amount of money in that account. Are we able to capitalize on that like we're doing with some of our funds right now?
Got the same place.
I don't know the answer to that.
We are only going to draw the money when we need it. So we're not, even if we have the 15 million, it's not like we've got 15 million sitting in the bank. We're only going to pull it as we need it.
Because then you don't want to pay the interest on it to hold it. You're not going to gain anything on it, so.
Hold on.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a cash flow question because it's going to be dependent on what projects finish up. It's probably going to be kind of a revolving pot because we're going to be paying for stuff. We'll start getting the money in January, but by that point, we'll have already started paying for stuff and continuing to pay for stuff. So it's all going to be dependent on the projects and when they are completed.
Be a balancing act for you.
But I'll ask the question to Chazzo about when they're due.
It was a good question.
All right, if you can advance back to, just keep going until I tell you to stop.
Joe.
Forward.
Reviewing your report card at the end of the meeting.
Keep, all right, there. So, understanding interest rates, if anyone's been paying attention over the last several months, you've heard kind of an array of interest rates, and these are some really important slides because it bases the assumptions of what you've just seen, which could change things, hopefully in the positive. there's a 20-year high interest rate, which is something the LGC actually just recently incorporated due to some legislative changes that were made this year. So basically, when you look at your disclosures and everything that you see in the ballot question are going to be based on this 20-year high interest rate, which is 3.44. How this was, I'm sorry, 5.344. How this was figured out was that the LGC basically required our folks to take the highest tax-exempt interest rates for similar debt over the last 20 years and project that out and how that would affect our ratepayers. So this is...
So our numbers are based on 5.344.
Correct. Yes. So this is, again, this is what you will see on the ballot. These are all the tax implications that we've just mentioned. This is kind of worst-case scenario.
So there's really layers of conservative,
Yes, there is. Yeah.
projections built in here.
The current estimated interest rates that we have seen as of December of this past year were around 3.35. And I guess you've since said that they've gone down even further. The actual interest rates depended on the bond market conditions at the time of issuance, so we likely won't even see the actual real interest rate until several months after they pass. So hopefully they will have gone down even more since then. That's what our rate will be at that point.
When you say issuance, does that mean the whole amount gets locked in for the next 20 at that rate? Or is that just as you pull money out?
We'll ask us for a chunk up.
Yeah, so
So each time you ask a chunk, it could be a different rate?
It could be.
Yes, but that's a really good question because we're doing 2 tranches. So if you go back a couple slides, Austin. Keep going. Right there. So if you see these 2 years of 25 and 28, those are essentially what we're considering our tranches. We're going to grab one good chunk in 25 and one good chunk in 28. So those, at that point in time, those will be the issuance amounts there.
And that's based on the full amount, taking advantage of the full amount
So,
in 2 tranches.
yeah, so I don't have the tranches right in front of me, but essentially, I don't know if it was half and half, but we have, let's just say half.
7 point something and then the rest. But, no, I don't remember what I was gonna say.
But so let's just say it's half. Let's just say 15 million divided in half, so 7. So we would basically take 7 million out in 26 or 25, and then the other 7 million in 28. And I'll get those tranche amounts, so we'll have that handy.
But again, that's if every project costs exactly what we've projected. And I think that we'll have a really, well, no, I know we'll have a really good idea, because as soon as we know that this passes, I want basically RFPs going out for everything that we want done, so that we know exactly how much everything's gonna cost.
So I have one question. Okay, so here we are in 2026, and we see something happen drastic with the economy, and we project that maybe interest rates could go up. Do we have the option to take the second tranche early to
Yeah.
head that off? Okay, so that.
We can take it whenever we want to.
I just,
Or not take it.
that's just for planning purposes.
Yeah.
It's not locked in that we have to wait that long. So we can manipulate that to our advantage if we need to.
Yes.
Okay.
And if you could advance, just until I tell you to stop.
It would help with the local economy at least, because we know we would have.
All right, right here, stop. All right, so I had this in here, but I think it's safe to take this out, but I just wanted to make sure you guys were in agreement. We've heard a bunch of different interest rates over the last couple of months, and the very first one that we heard was the 6.19 that we discussed, which was the safe harbor. It's obsolete now because of the recent changes with the legislator. I didn't know if y'all wanted to keep this somewhere just in case. Okay. All right, so we'll take this out, so we're not even gonna talk about this.
let's say we pull the second tranche and we come in way under budget. And I could see somebody saying, well, what happens if you pull the second tranche and you don't need it all, and you've got all this money that you pulled, but you didn't spend it? What happens to that money? Can you give it back, or can you spend it on something else?
We wouldn't pull it unless we needed it.
Or you just
But
use it?
if the project comes in under budget, or you end up not needing what you pulled, I could see someone asking, if there's leftover money, what happens to it?
Then we pay it back.
Yeah,
We-
or you
just
just
send it
use it
back.
for
We
repayment.
pay down the debt early.
Perfect.
So I'd be very delicate in answering that question, because this board may decide they want to pull it back, but a future board may decide something different. So the answer is, legally, the council at the time can decide to reallocate those funds to a different project within the scope of the bond question. But this current council is committed to only using what we need.
And paying back
Yeah.
early,
We
okay,
have
perfect.
approved as far as RFPs going out and things are.
I mean, I
Are
don't-
there
I don't-
any penalties for early repayment?
No.
Okay.
Well, yes, within, you have to, you can't pay it off before 10 years.
We're never going to pay it off before 10 years, so. But I don't foresee us pulling too much money, and I don't see any project ever coming under budget, so.
Well, one of the
I
points.
agree, but somebody could ask that, so I just wanted to have an answer.
I think the goal is, as I tell when I'm dealing with a contractor, I would rather have you under-promise and over-deliver. Like, hey, this is what it is, and if we get something that's less than what it's gonna cost, good for us, puts us in a better light, but over-promising doesn't do us any good. And
In the unlikely event that that question really can hold some credence, is if there's a grant that's received. Let's just say we got, a $5 million grant for a park project, or we were able to obtain some type of sponsor for a park project and we no longer needed it. That's where that could really hold some opportunities, but in that situation, this board or a future board could decide to take that $5 million and reallocate it to put in another park, so.
We could have small, like, $100,000 left over
Yeah.
from,
Yeah.
from having a contingency and it not costing as much. But those are not like significant.
Well,
Yes,
you're
to
also
this.
gonna have unanticipated costs, like what you just mentioned earlier. There's a road that slopes and you hadn't thought about that. Those things are gonna pop up.
Yeah.
For sure.
Christina, can you tell me where we're getting that 3.4 as of, interest rate as of December 20th?
Yep, if you can go back to the first slide.
Where is that coming from?
the current one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so our financial advisors estimated that at the bond market conditions at the time, I'm sorry, no, that's what the First Tryon folks had given us, that were the current rate in the market at that time.
And
Okay.
right now, that's better than any home loan,
Oh, my gosh.
Absolutely.
car loan, anything.
I mean, it's almost two
It's
points lower.
almost free money, but it's not.
And
Almost 2 points lower.
Chazo will be here he'll be here at the town hall meeting, not this one.
Yeah, it's not much more than we paid for Village Hall financing, right? We were at 2
Yeah.
point something.
Yeah, but think when we got that, like.
Can you
interest rates
advance
were right
slides?
there. Okay.
Saying it's not going up a lot.
Advance. All right, so the current financial status highlights, and this is really just kind of a recap for the public to kind of show why all this kind of falls together and fits in a nice, pretty puzzle piece. If you can, next slide. So as of 6/30 of '23, this is just really a good snapshot of our financial assets and where we are. We currently have about $1.8 million in unassigned fund balance. This is essentially our savings account. We have $1.8 million in our savings account. And we use this for various purposes. We use it for cash flow purposes to fund projects. There's a big lull period from us actually getting bills for our taxes and receiving that money. Our bills go out in September. We don't start receiving those monies until January. So we have a good chunk of months that we have to front cash for our bills, solid waste bills, payroll, that kind of stuff. So that's where we use a lot of that for cash flow and for project purposes. We do have, if you look down at the second bullet, we have a combined fund balance of about $3.4 million. That includes projects that our council currently and other councils in the previous life have decided they wanted to earmark some money, and those were for various projects. Parks and Recreation, land acquisition, road improvements, that kind of stuff. We don't always do road repairs every single year, so there's a portion of that money that gets put back into fund balance so that we can use it every other year for road repairs. One of the common things that we have seen in the past is what's called net position, and you see that listed at 14.8 million. And if you can advance to the next slide, I'll go over that in a little bit more detail. So this is how our net position has increased over the year. You see 6.5 in year 2019, and then we've gone all the way up to basically 14 million in the last couple of years. This is not liquid cash. Like, this is not what we have cash dollars in the bank account. This is our assets, which includes the, it's the difference of assets and liabilities. So it's kind of our net worth.
Like the park would be in that number.
Yes.
A value
Yeah.
associated with it, the village hall, yeah.
Yes.
Real estate assets and things like that, yeah.
So I don't want people to get confused that we have 14 million sitting in the bank. This is really the difference of assets and liabilities, which can be used for financing things or it cannot. Like, let's just say this property that we're sitting in right now is valued at $5 million. That's included in that number there. We can't just spend $5 million that we don't have in the bank. So that's what that is. So there's a real difference between net asset, net position, and fund balance.
And thinking of it from in terms of an individual with net asset value, is that a number we could borrow off of?
That'd be your.
It definitely looks favorable on your financial health, but I don't think it depends on the type of borrowing. We can't just go to a bank and say, hey, we've got a net position of 15 million, can we get 15 million out? They need to see that collateral if we're gonna do an installment. Yeah.
But it's essentially like your equity, right? What you own
Essentially, yeah.
versus what you.
There's things in there that we couldn't liquidate. For example, we have easements in our net assets. We're not going to turn around and
Roadways,
sell an
easements,
easement.
they're part of our net, but we can't liquidate
And we have
them.
roads. Roads is one of the biggest reasons that this net assets has increased over the years. We can't sell a road.
Right.
So,
One of the reasons that we're putting this in here, because it's really important that, I think it's really important that the community understands that we're not just spending money on something. Like, we're actually getting an asset for what we're spending the money
Right, our
on.
net position will go up.
Will go up significantly.
Right.
So it's not just spending money just to spend money, we're getting something for it. I think that's a big, big deal.
all right, next slide. So based on the proposed bonds, how will the net position change? So again, as we just saw, we went from 6.5 basically up to 15 million, and the majority of that is because we've acquired a lot of roads. We've got Village Hall. So yes, we will see the net position increase. So what happens is the village records that asset as a non-current capital asset, but also records kind of the offsetting liability. So as long as the depreciation is not faster, you'll see that increase go up, which we will likely see. I know Mayor Pro Tem wanted me to kind of put a dollar point on that, and I can't really do that because there's so many different variables, but we will likely see an increase. Next slide. So why is the current financial position relevant to the GO bonds? So basically, going back to your question about financial health is determined by those fund balance levels. The LGC and crediting agencies look at those types of things when they're passing GO bonds, and they pay very close attention to our financial health. So without the use of GO bonds, our capacity to fund these projects while maintaining that fund balance is really limited. We do rely on that fund balance for, like I said, cash flow purposes, and drawing that down could pose us into a less favorable position financially. And the LGC could come in and take corrective action on us. We also greatly increase the capacity for maintaining that fund balance and borrowing with the GO bonds to cover all the projects that are needed over this defined period of time.
And that 8% number you had a couple slides ago that were in good financial health, how does that compare to most municipalities across the state of North Carolina?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can get some answers on that. You,
Can you stop saying that that's a good question, please?
I do have a count over here, and sorry, John, this is one of my pet peeves.
okay, yeah, I'll get an answer to that.
Questions and Kim
Next slide. So why not let citizens pick and choose from a project list on the ballot? So this question basically asks, like, why don't we itemize all the projects that we're going to accomplish and just kind of let people pick and choose? So creating those separate ballot questions for each individual project poses issues with flexibility, time, and cost, and all that good stuff. While the cost of issuance for a bond is generally estimated on the total bond amount, so things probably wouldn't likely change financially a lot, there's a lot of administrative procedure that goes into formation of these bond questions, preparing the financial documents, the financial analysis, the publications, the formatting the questions. So there's going to be some marginal increases that we see. Flexibility is the biggest issue because we have 7 years to issue the bonds once they're approved. And like we'd mentioned before, there can be changes in boards, there could be changes in processes due to grant funding or just various things that cause lower flexibility. If we received a grant, like I'd mentioned before, for this park over here, we would likely want to reallocate that money somewhere else to serve other populations in Marvin. And without having that flexibility, that really prohibits us from doing that.
I think this is obvious. I mean, allowing the citizens to pick projects, you can have 20, 30 different projects that people are in favor of, and we need to focus on 5, so
That's really the purpose of the survey initially,
Right.
you know.
But
Okay,
I
next
guess
slide.
There's still people out there asking that.
So how can I be guaranteed projects listed on the educational material as presented will be implemented? So again, the current council that's sitting here tonight is committed to the project list as we've advertised. So unless there's major shifts in priority due to unanticipated factors that we just really haven't thought of, then the projects that are listed here are very well intended to be completed within the scope of this bond. So again, we can't bind future cancels to various projects. So unless there's some major changes in kind of the dynamic and what we see, we don't intend to see any changes. Next slide. Oh, go back, I'm sorry. One thing I'll mention is this example here. I said an example, if a park and recreation bond is approved, a future cancel or this cancel can't decide that they want to implement a solid waste facility or a landfill. They have to keep it in the Parks and Recreation field. So we may not necessarily do Village Hall because of whatever. We got a grant, the board changed, they didn't want to do it, but we still have to keep that money into Parks and Recreation. We can't just put it into a completely different project. Next slide. If referendum questions are approved, I don't like how that's worded, but let me, okay. How quickly would that be, would projects begin? Some projects will begin as soon as 6 to 12 months, but the answer really depends on various things. We've got a lot of work to happen before we actually can break ground. We've got to have engineer drawn plans on several things. We've got to go through the formalized bidding process that's required by the law. We also have weather conditions that may affect, we can only pave and during certain parts of the year, and then we also have outside agencies that we've got to work with, such as DOT.
But some are in place, correct? Some of those plans
Yes,
are already
yeah.
in place, and
Yeah,
it's just.
we
a
have
matter
been,
of-
yeah, we have been working on a lot of stuff.
It's always been a matter of funding for years, so these plans are in place, and we have.
That's why it could start as soon as 6 months, because some of the
But
planning has already taken place.
I would like to put on here somewhere that when it gets approved, because I'm going to be positive, when it gets approved, it's not like we can turn around and pull the money tomorrow. It then has to go back to the LGC. They then have to re-look at it and approve it, and then we go out to bid for our interest rate. So
Okay.
we just need to make sure that people know that it's not like we can turn around and pull the money the next day. Like, there's a significant process that goes along with that.
We can add that.
Where the 6 to 12 months comes in.
No, well, yeah, because we won't have the money until the fall, probably.
But during that time, we
We
can
can
go
be
out for
working
bid
on-
and we can do all
correct.
this stuff. So
Yes.
everything comes together at once so that we can get started in the 6 to
Yep.
12-month timeframe.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm a little confused by that, too. So if it gets approved in March 24, but we don't bill until fall 25, and we don't get the money till early January 2026, but we're saying we're going to start the projects immediately, pretty much, 6 to 12
No,
months.
there's, and I don't have it in front of me, there's a schedule that, do y'all have your bond schedule, the revised one pulled up?
No.
There's I added some steps to the following pages, but we would actually call in fall. So we could potentially get the money in fall,
This
next fall.
fall 24.
Or, sorry, fall 24, yes. I'm still in
Okay.
23.
I could
But
just see
Jill's
somebody asking this, like, how can you start the projects in 6 to 12 months if the money's not coming until 25, 26?
And
And
that's
if you
what the
have the
fund-
money
That's
now,
coming
why are
from
we
the
doing this?
residents. We can get the money before we have the money from the residents.
But that's one of the reasons we have fund balance too, to front money for various things.
Projects with fund
So-
balance and repay fund balance with
Okay.
the net proceeds of the loan.
I see somebody saying, well, if you've got the money to start now, why do we even need to do this? You know, I'm just asking.
I mean, something as small as a pickleball court that cost $100,000, we've got $100,000 to, I mean, well, I mean, knowing that I'm just saying, if it's a smaller project, I'm using that as an example.
Or phased projects where you start with phase 1 and do that, phase 2 and phase 3 and whatever.
Projects beginning could be something
Yeah.
as simple as staff planning and stuff like that, that could be.
Okay, next slide.
day,
She's digging
slide.
ditches.
digging ditches.
I would wait until the LGC approves it.
They've already approved it once, so I can't imagine that they're not gonna,
Can-
So what happens once all the projects are completed? So the bonds mature in 20 years. Will the tax rate revert back to the pre-bond rate? Again, we've said this a couple of times. The current cancel cannot legally bind future cancels to lower the tax rate once the bonds are repaid. A future cancel could decide to increase or decrease the tax rate at that point in time, independent of the bonds entirely. So one of the questions that's been asked is what happens if the total bond proceeds are not needed? So if project costs come in lower than expected, the village would only borrow what's needed unless a future board decided to borrow up to the approved amount. Again, this cancel is committed to only borrowing what's needed.
You know, you have you guys in the same category, because you can, as you said
Yeah.
previously, you cannot take the money and do something else with it.
Yep. All right, next slide. Who monitors to assure bonds are being spent as intended? The LGC. They monitor pretty much everything from beginning to end, and then they also look over our audits every year to ensure compliance, so. Next slide. What happens if the bonds don't pass? Then the projects that we've mentioned could be delayed or even canceled, and hopefully we can find other sources of funding, but that could also include future tax increases. And then there is also the risk of higher project costs at that point due to whatever inflation we see in the next 10 to 20 years. Next slide. That's pretty much summarizes it, so unless,
So who in, let's, again, Kim's point, think positive, this thing gets approved and we're moving forward down the thing. Who do we see as the go-to person from staff level of particular projects? Is it gonna be based on the project itself? Have we thought about, okay, if it's Parks and Recs, it's gonna be under this person. If it's roads, it's under someone else. Have we talked about that at all?
that would be Jill. No, it would,
she didn't say it was a good question.
But it would be a good question to ask. No, I'm just curious, because there's always gonna be questions on any projects we have. So when that comes into that front office, have we delegated and thought about?
I mean, honestly, it's gonna fall on me to get all of it done, so.
I'm sorry?
Mostly all of it will fall on me.
Okay.
we'll have portions of the road that's, divvied out to Davy, but it's gonna be a process. I mean, there'll be,
In general, say roads would be under Davy, is what you're saying?
She said her.
Probably
Well,
most of the
it-
projects would be supervised by Davy, but then
yeah.
supervised, he would
The
be supervised
administrative
by
side of it's
Christina.
gonna be me. I'm gonna have to do the RFQ, the RFP, putting the package together. We'll go through the bidding. He'll be doing the construction management side of it, so to say, but. All right. Any overall questions? If not, we can just spend a couple seconds to go back through each individual slide to see if y'all want to change anything, if you want to move anything around. Any overall questions?
I did have one. On the Parks and Rec slide, I didn't see, maybe I'm wrong, any mention of soccer fields or baseball fields or anything like that. So I'm just curious if anyone, because people who've been listening or looking at our meetings know that there was a recent discussion about that. Is part of any of that money, the 1 million or any of it, potentially could be used for soccer fields or baseball fields if somebody asks?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The not subcommittee, I'll get in trouble if I use that word, the work group that we have put together, that's the field assessment work group, we're still talking about what needs are out there. Like, what do we need? Do we need softball? Do we need baseball? Do we need soccer? Do we need football? So to answer your question, I don't know if we're at the point where we actually know what we need. So we just kind of blanketly said, future park space.
The answer is yes and no.
Yeah.
Could it be used for that? Sure. Might it not be used for that? Yes.
In 2 years, you may have a whole new council that says, you know what?
They don't like-
I'm not interested in having ball fields
Yeah.
or something.
I just
But
didn't know if
the
we could
intent
add it
of
to that
having-
bullet.
You're talking about ball fields and stuff, which I think most young families want to see something like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's no space for it now, but that's not to say that we couldn't potentially, we talked about this before, team up with Waxaw and say, hey, there's a 30-some acre property that we would have funding to be able to share that cost with them. And again, we're getting to the same place, but again, under promise, over deliver, is all we can say. Is if the property comes available and all of a sudden, we can
I just
do
want to be
7
prepared if
acres
somebody
comes.
asks, because we have been talking about fields lately, and I didn't see fields listed on that slide. And if someone says, well, is any of that 5 million going to get us some soccer fields? We need to know how to answer that question.
Yeah, well,
It could.
It could,
We
okay.
just don't know yet.
Yeah,
until-
it might, or it could. Okay, good question. Thank you.
find me the land and,
Not
does
that we're
that make
not
sense
looking,
for
it's just
Marvin?
that we don't have anything set in stone yet.
So for, specifically, let's say for tomorrow night, when we have our meeting, Christina, you said that staff's gonna be here. Do I need to bring my laptop with this PowerPoint on it to hook up? Are you guys gonna have something here to utilize? Like, how are we working that?
We'll get it figured out. We've got a laptop over there that we can upload.
Okay, but what if, like, I mean, you're gonna, except for Martin Luther King, you're gonna have staff
Oh,
here?
for that date. Let me get with Austin on that one, actually.
I think you mentioned on the 11th, I think Wayne and I are kind of on our own for projection purposes, so I can come by at some point if somebody
that the
needs
Marvin
to show
Creek
me
one?
that.
Is that the Marvin Creek one?
No, the Marvin Creek one, I think, is going to be at Marvin Creek. I'm talking about the
Marvin
one
Creek
on
one
the
is gonna be at Marvin
11th,
Creek.
Thursday, the 11th, from Providence Estates and the other ones.
Oh, I mean, I should have a staff assigned to that one.
For some reason, before you said you wouldn't,
The only
but
one that
On the
she
11th?
is MLK Day, whatever date that is.
Did you say February 11th?
no, January. That was the one you sent the invite to me.
No, Austin will be there for that one.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so let's just go through these one last time to make sure when y'all were, just kind of refresh your memory. So, Austin, if you can.
Hold on, let me just, everybody needs to lean into their microphones. We have a resident who is listening and thinks that we are trying to hide things. So, because he cannot hear, and sometimes we accidentally forget to turn on our microphones. So if everybody can please lean into their microphones and talk and speak loudly so that everyone can hear. And I'm happy to do this and be real loud about it, so, because I don't want anybody to think that we are hiding anything. Can everybody agree to make sure that their microphones are on and lean in and speak loudly and clearly?
Yes, ma'am.
And since, just to go on the record, since the person is calling me out specifically, saying I'm trying to hide things, I can assure you I'm not. And at the end of the day, I don't vote on any of these other than just run the meeting. So I'm not trying to hide anything. My apologies if my microphone was not on. And if you want to be specific, either email me or text me separately about what issues you are concerned about.
Okay, next slide.
Okay, go ahead. I do have some other things that I would like to go over, but we will do that after we go through the slide presentation one more time.
All right, again,
Bob, you weren't in here when I said this. We have a resident who is listening and cannot hear and thinks that we are trying to hide things. So please make sure that your microphone is on and you lean into it and speak and talk loudly and clearly.
all right. Presentation overview, bond facts. Go ahead, advance. What are the different mechanism types of funding? I'm just going to keep going unless y'all say stop. Go ahead. The facts of what a bond referendum is. Advance. Why are we seeking to fund these projects through GO bonds? Whether places have done them successfully.
Hang on, Christina.
Okay.
Did you have a question about this one? Mr. Mayor, you made a note here.
I'm just noting key, because I'm assuming not only are we going to be working off of this, the slide projection if we are using it, but I'll also, if we don't have that ability in some places, we'd be working off type things. So I'm just making for me that are specifically important to highlight to the community. So.
Christina, can we make sure that we get printouts of this slideshow for all of council so that we can have these handy for our meetings in addition to it being up on the projector?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next slide. This is just a continuation. Some modifications needed here, but nothing from a content standpoint. Next slide. How long have we been talking about this? Next slide. Has there been public support for these bond referendums? And these next couple of slides show that support. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. These are the bond totals. Next slide. These are all the projects that are listed in the transportation. We will itemize out that roundabout for Bonds Grove, Waxhaw, Marvin.
How long is each meeting scheduled to last?
I've been telling people that it's about an hour, but it just really depends on how many questions that we have, because I know that this took us about an hour and 45 minutes to go through, but there was a lot of stop and start and other conversations that were held trying to schedule meetings. But I would say for the most part an hour, but I'm willing and happy to stay for as long as anyone has questions.
Next slide. Yeah, we'll clean this up a little bit just so y'all know. Next slide. Here we'll add some kind of comment about inclement weather applications. And next slide. All the parks and recreation projects. Next slide. Any changes y'all want to make to the parks and recreational additional properties to include ball fields or anything? Just keep it generic. Okay,
I would say keep it generic.
Okay, next slide.
So should we remove the specifics down there, tennis courts, pickleball, any of that?
No, because we've specifically talked about adding that at the Publix Pocket Park.
And it's also already added.
And we have a place for it.
It's also already added on your postcards and flyers that have been printed.
Okay.
Just visuals. Next slide. Next slide. Taxes.
Can we make a note on this slide that anyone that is less than Marvin in their tax rate does not maintain their roads? Is that a factual statement that we can make?
I cannot make that factual statement without calling all of those individually and asking them. If we have time to do that before tomorrow,
But
we
don't they
can.
have to have at least a 5-cent tax rate in order to be Powell bill?
They do, but that doesn't mean they don't do roads. They could do it with their general fund.
Okay. Well, can
But
we do,
I'll see what I can do
can we
on that
do
one.
that? Okay. I just need that by tomorrow evening, if possible.
Okay. Next slide. All right, so,
You're going to add if the full amount is utilized to this
Yes.
slide?
yep. Disclaimer. All right. All right, I'm sorry, I'm losing track. All right, we're going to take out the monthlies on this individual household, and we're going to highlight the interest rate at the bottom. All right, what's the value of my house? Next slide. The anticipated debt repayment. Next slide. Understanding these interest rates. Anything on here? You guys good on that? Next slide.
So, just real quick, so once it's approved, we shop it technically, correct? And that process takes how long? Going back to as fast as you want to get these projects rolling, how long does that process take?
Will one of y'all run to my office real quick and grab that schedule that's kind of magneted to the board?
I don't think actually getting the interest rate nailed down from whoever we're going to borrow the money from is going to take a long amount of time. I'm sure that we put it out for quote-unquote bid for a certain amount of time, but I can't imagine
Yeah.
that process itself would take a long time.
She's going to go grab it, and I can better answer that question. I will also get the tranche amounts, so we have them handy during these slides as well. While she's grabbing that, we'll progress over to the financial status slides. Yeah. Next. Just the financial highlights here. Net position here. Go back, please. Go back. Any things you want to add to this one or the fund balance? Yeah.
The LGC, to make things maybe easier for you, Christina, wouldn't they have a list of current municipalities that people are familiar with as far as in their cash position?
Yes.
Or
Yeah, they
yeah,
do.
so we could hopefully find that. I just like to note that we're at the top percentage level. I've always been told we're very fiscally sound. We've always been fiscally sound, never running, upside down on that. And to point that out, and that we always have been fiscally responsible.
I would think our auditor's comments in our audit year after year that we are healthy financially is good to focus on. I don't know that we have time to sort of compare our level of health to other municipalities around the state, but I would say year after year, our auditor's opinion, which can be found in our annual audits, is that we are fiscally responsible and financially healthy.
Yeah, I
year
don't
after
want to
year.
create more work for you, but if it was something as an easy list of where municipalities rank as far as percentage of cash on hand and health, I'm sure they rank it somewhere like they rank all these other things, so.
There's a tool that's on their website. It's been a long time since I've looked at it. I'll try to see if I can find it quickly. If I can, it's literally just a graph to add in there.
I think this is also a good point while we're talking about the village's financial health to also just reiterate that the village has never run on a deficit. We're not allowed to run on a deficit. And we
Correct.
won't run on a deficit, period, as others have said.
Correct.
Austin, if you could go back a couple slides. Back. Here's where you asked the question, around this area, you asked the question about the scheduling. So just tentatively what I've got after the elections are certified, which is going to be in mid-April, June 12th, well, around June-ish, we will have information due to the LGC. There's also a first draft of official statements and then a due diligence conference call that all would take place in June. In July, the LGC would move forward with a point of sale and notice of sale. And then August, we would finalize the notice and point of sale and have the actual bond sale and pricing in late August. And then in September, we would see the bond closing and delivery. So we could actually have money September, October. So did you want me to lay that out somewhere on here? I had put it at the end where it kind of talked about next steps, but I can add it.
On this slide?
Yeah, that's where you had asked. I think it fits better on the next steps. I'll come back to where I think it fits better. You can advance slide, please. Advance again. Around in this area right here, I'll try to add in a chart from the LGC if I can get that fixed pretty quickly. Next slide. All right, so basically we're going to be able to pay our bonds back at what we've just talked about from the tax impact. Next slide. Why does all this matter? We went over that earlier. And then here is where we could add in that information of how do we compare to others after this one. Next slide. How do we have we went over that one. Why not pick and choose? Next slide. How can I be guaranteed? We went over that one. Next slide. What if it doesn't pass? Next slide. Sorry, that was, the next one's what if it doesn't pass? Or no, I'm sorry, I was right. What happens in 20 years? We went over that one. Next slide. Who monitors us? LGC. Next slide. And then what if it doesn't pass? Next slide. That's it. So overall, does all of it make sense? Does all of it flow? Do you think anything needs to be changed in terms of positioning of slides? Do we tell the story at the right time? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah, I think it's very well done. And I think probably this would take approximately, since we started the meeting, probably take about an hour, maybe, to go through this.
That's what we were thinking. I mean, we'll allow questions and stuff, and
Can we all at least commit as council members to stay more than an hour, or what we need to
Absolutely.
stay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, just so
Yeah.
to be on record, Kim is the only one that mentioned that, but I'm willing to stick around and talk about it as long as we want. We may not be able to answer all the questions. That's why we're here doing this, but hopefully we will be able to at least give them direction.
I guess one of the things I would be looking for from an efficiency standpoint is some ground rules that we can kind of lay out. Like if we could try to get through the whole PowerPoint from people, because they're going to have questions throughout that we're likely going to answer. So I don't know if we want to allow people to ask questions and we can write them down while the presentation is going on, but not yet answer them because we're likely going to get to it at some point. But we need to come to an agreement on some type of at least loose formatting.
Yeah, I think we've got to get through the PowerPoint first, let everybody hold their questions until the end, and then if we need to go back to a slide, we can go back to a slide and then take questions at the end. But there's no way that if we do it, we're going to be here for 3 hours, the same way that we were today.
I think if you're doing it, holding the questions, it's not going to be more than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
To get through.
Probably, just to run through it pretty
And then you get back to
efficiently.
the questions.
So do you want to ask folks to hold their questions, or do you
Yes.
want to allow them to ask and we'll write them down?
Hold
No.
on. Because a lot of them will be answered in the presentation anyway, so
Okay.
that would.
Okay.
At least the ones we can answer are going to be in there.
Yeah,
You know.
I agree.
So whoever's kind of officiating the meeting, then we just need to make sure that whoever that is kind of holding to that.
Okay, we just had Weddington Chase say that they would like to meet with us on Tuesday, the 23rd, here at Village Hall at 6:30. Who can do that? The 23rd of January.
I can do that.
John?
You've got, planning board.
Yeah, we got a planning board.
Planning board's on the 23rd here for their recessed meeting. You also have a coffee of council at the same time.
Okay, well, that is, I have marked off the 9th and the 16th for planning board.
That's their normal meeting. They have a recess session for the UDO project the following Tuesday.
Okay, well, they're going to have to go into the other room. I mean, we're going to, sorry.
It's live streamed, so we can't live stream in there. That's the thing.
I mean, I'm sorry, but the bond is more important than the recessed UDO planning board meeting.
Is that, I know that we put those in the calendar for like if we need them. Is that one that we know we're going to need? Okay. We'll work on some stuff internally.
Okay, so who wants to do that? John?
Yes.
Who else?
I can do it.
Andy? Bob, I only have you down for 2, my friend. You want to do that one?
I would do that one, but I'm in the planning board.
Again, I think that this is more important than the planning board meeting. All right, Wayne.
And that's at what, 6:30, did you say?
Who's that, Wayne and
Wayne,
John?
Andy, and John.
Which is the one on a Friday that we're meeting?
Courtyards,
What date?
the 2nd of February.
February.
February. It's not February, it's February.
February. I was born in February.
You said that was Marvin Creek, right?
Okay. So does anybody have, okay, so I think one person, whoever is in your little group to do these, whoever that is needs to, basically, you need to pick one person to run through the slideshow. Because if you've got people, more than one person chiming in, it's going to take forever. So whoever you're working with, just pick one person to go through the slideshow. We don't have to do that now, I'm just saying.
Kim, you said that was Marvin Creek meeting?
Weddington Chase.
Weddington Chase, sorry.
Weddington Chase on the 23rd, Village Hall, 6:30, John, Andy, and Wayne. And is it a state statute that we have to live stream meetings now?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right, then we can, Record it.
We'll talk.
can you live stream in that room? Okay, well, then somebody can tape it. Just like we used to before COVID, before we had all this stuff. If it's not a state statute, then we can figure something else out. Okay, anybody else got questions? Anybody else have questions about presenting this? Questions about what to say, what not to say?
I'll just take a moment to reiterate that anything that we do has to be neutrality, like we have to promote neutrality. So just a gentle reminder.
Back to your question on who leads this. Will it by chance be sent to our devices so we can present from here if it doesn't work as a backup? I mean,
I can definitely email it to you, but we should have someone on staff or someone that knows how to do it to pull it up.
Okay.
But, I mean, we'll have printouts too if need be. Is that sufficient?
Any other questions?
Does that conclude our meeting? Are we done agenda-wise?
I mean, if nobody else has any questions, but seriously, like, we've got to know this stuff front ways, back ways, review it before your first presentation to a neighborhood.
The only thing I was going to maybe ask is if in the case of Marvin Creek, that the audiovisual isn't available, though it may be costly, these are wonderful presentations that we can maybe print and then distribute?
Yeah, we'll print some from Marvin Creek. I'll get with Milan, and
Okay.
if it's not available, we'll print them.
If, after the first go through this tomorrow, if, we realize it's way too much information or it's way too long, we can't get through it all, do we have the ability to summarize or truncate or shorten some of this without having to reconvene and go through this again? Or, and who can do that?
I mean, I think tomorrow night was going to be our guinea pig, so I think if everybody's in agreement and we see that it's going too long and we're getting too bogged down in the details, then we can maybe, I can call each one individually and talk to those who weren't here and say, hey, this is where we're getting locked up. We're going to take some of these out, but we'll still have the slides, so if anybody has questions, but we're not going to have it in the presentation. Does that work?
It's
For
fine with me,
council?
but I don't see where it's going to go that way, but yeah, that's fine with me
Okay.
for contingency.
I mean, if y'all are okay with Mayor Pro Tem and I just making an administrative decision at that point in time, instead of her having to call all of you guys, I think that's probably more efficient.
And-
Are y'all okay with that,
Yes.
since we'll both be here? Okay.
And refresh my memory, none of these are intended to be Zoomed, or are they?
No.
Okay.
No, because we're giving people an opportunity with their neighborhoods, and if you can't make your neighborhood's meeting, come to another one. So if anybody else is listening, please ask us when those are going to be. And then we also have the town hall for it.
That being said, then can we at least have Austin, or may they already be on the, where we're having them and when?
On the website?
On the website? Well, Kim appears to have it because she made sure we have all that, but just to make sure it's out there, I mean, I don't know if we're doing it off-site, if that group would be allow someone from another neighborhood saying, oh, they're having it over at.
Yeah, they might not be available on their night. They can,
But if it's here, they're welcome because
Correct.
it's a public, obviously, meeting. It is a public meeting there too.
So they're all in your calendar. I've got, yeah.
Any other questions?
Except, I'm sorry, except the ones that were added today, which I haven't done yet.
Any other questions? All right, and as far as items of, we don't have a closed session, correct? So with that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.